Hello everyone, I'm so happy to be here today with you. There's something that I wanted to talk about the deaf community. And there are some problems that I'm noticing within our community I want to share with you. Misperceptions, language deprivation, interpreter issues. So let me begin. Let's talk about misperceptions and how we want to talk about that. Today a lot of people out in the world think about deaf people as being very different than you may be. For example, they'll ask, can deaf people drive? I thought deaf people could speak. Why can't you speak? I thought that deaf people couldn't do this, couldn't do that. Can you speak? Can you read? And those are the questions deaf people are faced with all the time. And it's very common for deaf people to get those types of questions. And that's one thing that I really wanted to talk about. We are the same. We are no different than you are. One of the things that puts a barrier between us is our hearing loss. That's all. It's a really simple answer to that question. It's nothing more than that makes us different. Talking about language deprivation, it's really sad for me to have to talk about this, but a very large percentage of deaf children are deprived from their very own language, their own self-identity. 3 out of 1,000 children are born deaf or hard of hearing. So imagine two things with that scenario. Imagine a deaf baby being born and a baby who can hear being born. So the baby who can hear is born to hearing parents. Language is perfect, life goes on. But if a deaf baby is born to parents who can hear, the parents think, oh, this child is different. Everything is so new. What is their culture? How do I communicate with them? So parents quite often first go to a doctor, thinking the doctor has all the answers for this new thing that's arrived in their life. The doctor may have one of two solutions to their problem. They may say, oh, what you're going to want to do is you're going to follow the way of teaching them to be hearing and forget about their deafness. Try and teach them to read lips and to use their speech. Take them to a school without interpreters or any special services that deaf people truly need. That child will grow up so frustrated and so confused in the world, not seeing where their place is. Are they deaf? Are they hearing? Where did they fit in? They will fall behind everything, whereas their hearing counterpart is caught up to their peers. Another thing really tugs at my heart about this. There was a girl that went through this very same situation. She was born deaf to hearing parents who didn't know what to do with her. So they took her to a doctor who again said, teach her to lip read, teach her to speak. So the parents didn't know anything about deafness or deaf culture or sign language. So that's what they did with this girl. She was raised in what's called the oral method. But she always felt something was missing in her life, and she didn't really know what the answer was. She'd never met deaf people. She knew nothing about deaf culture. Her life continued on, and she grew up. And then she got into a relationship with a boy and had herself a boyfriend. And he proposed marriage. But his way of proposing marriage was, I want to marry you so I can take care of you. That kind of incensed the girl. She thought, I don't need anyone to take care of me. So she broke up with that boyfriend and went to college, not knowing that the college she chose had a deaf program. So one day, sitting in the library doing some paperwork, she was approached by a deaf student who tapped her on the shoulder and said, hey, do you sign? This girl was dumbfounded. She couldn't figure out what was being communicated to her in sign language, but the girl gestured, do you want to go to a deaf school event with me? The student wasn't really sure if this should go or not, but decided to do it anyway. Getting there, she saw a room full of deaf people all communicating through sign language, and she thought, this is where I belong. This is where I fit. And all of her previous frustrations and anger were gone by meeting this community and knowing that's where she was truly a member of. That really affects me every time I think about that story. Because if you go to a doctor's office or something, they always say, well, go with the hearing way. That's the better life. And I don't know how many parents really want their children to succeed in life, so they think the doctor knows best for their children. One other thing that I really want to talk about having to do with deaf children, because we already have a lot of children who are deprived of their own language and identity as deaf people, is how much that deaf child will grow up in a very confused world, confused what their identity is, what their true language is. One of the solutions that I can suggest is to try and figure out a way to help them catch up with their own native language. And that's for those in their community to learn how to sign, to roll up their sleeves and be willing to learn the child's language and help them to have a better life. There are a lot of different ways to help within the deaf community. Help with their social life, attending deaf events. It could be maybe a sporting event including deaf people, or to take a class and learn more about the deaf community. There are a lot of options available. I also want to talk about deaf oppression. You know, this is something that also touches me deeply. There are a lot of deaf people who are faced with oppression every day. It could happen anywhere. It could be at the workplace. It could be a simple job interview, grocery shopping. Let me give you an example of what I mean. So imagine all of you, you're invited to a birthday party, and you come to the party and the room is full of deaf people signing. You're the only person there who hardly knows how to sign at all. And you're looking around desperately trying to figure out, what are people talking about? What's going on? Now you're there with a friend who has invited you, and you keep saying to your friend, I don't understand, what are they saying? Tell me, what are they saying? And your friend's response is, I'll tell you later, I'm busy talking. Imagine how you would feel. That would be a very oppressive situation for you. And that's why what we mean about deaf people being oppressed. There are a lot of different ways to improve that situation. One thing that I would suggest is to make sure that the person you are with feels included in everything. Give them your time to explain to them what's going on so they don't feel left out. Don't make it up. You know 75% of what's going on and they only know 25. Come up with a more 50-50 solution. I also want to talk about sign language interpreters in two things in particular. One of the main problems I think that's facing the deaf community has to do with interpreters. There are some companies, some places deaf people work, places they go for job interviews and such. When it comes down to hiring an interpreter, perhaps for a big event or something, let's talk about a government event. Let's remember a big world event that happened. And the stadium was full of people, including deaf people, and there was a famous presenter there. But the interpreter that they hired was signing gibberish. What they were signing didn't make sense at all. And the deaf people attending were missing out what was going on. Perhaps the information was very important that they needed to know, but the interpreter was incapable of having the skills to convey that information. It's so important to get a nationally certified interpreter. But the problem is they're expensive, they're not always available. You really need to get a certified interpreter because we deaf people need the same rights as hearing people to know and to have access to everything, while quite often we don't, and it's very sad to have to admit that. Another thing about interpreters is to make sure that they're qualified. That's very important to the deaf community because we need to be able to communicate in an equal manner in every way. For example, if a deaf person has to meet with their attorney at a law firm, an interpreter may be hired to come in. This is a very important legal situation, perhaps involving a lot of legal paperwork, a lot of legal jargon is being used. But if the interpreter doesn't understand legal jargon, doesn't understand what the attorney's saying, doesn't understand what the deaf person is saying, miscommunication could happen. Both parties could think they are communicating with each other, but they truly aren't. And a lot of chaos can ensue. So that's what it's so important to be able to have that not happen by having a qualified interpreter. So we have to have the right services, the right interpreter, such in a legal situation or any other type of work. So really that's why qualified interpreters are really needed, because a lot of companies may not hire the most qualified or may not hire a certified interpreter. And that leads to a lot of miscommunication and misunderstandings. And that's something that hearing people don't always have in their own lives. Thank you very much.